for this presentation, we are going to be using the iPhone 13 Pro as an example because that's the phone that we shoot on. But the sort of things to watch out for, sort of the information that we're describing should be generally applicable to any smartphone.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is just having to do with cameras. So
Yeah. So the details might differ between devices, but it's just to give you an idea of what to look out for and kind of where to start researching and looking into, your own device, whichever device you want to use. Because each phone is different. So if we could do a deep dive into every phone, that would be great. But that would take forever.
Too many
So,
phones.
and I don't have that many phones. I just have mine. So,
All right, I guess let's just jump into it.
that's it. Okay.
Wait,
There it is. I
So
wonder if I can go back on this.
can you go backwards?
Oh, it doesn't let me.
Hmm.
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 Hmm. That's okay. I'll just have to be careful to not go back. Okay. So, who are we?
We are Kirsten Thomas Nishimoto. Like Beck said in our introduction, we are twin brother filmmakers, and we've been making movies together for a long time. We sort of got our start the way that a lot of I think, filmmakers do, which is we just started by making movies together in our backyard. Um, and when we went to college, we studied film and we got access to all of the equipment that our film school had. And so we got access to all the expensive cameras and the equipment and all that. But when we got closer to graduating, we started thinking about our future and we realized, we're not going to have access to this equipment once we graduate. So what we wanted to do is we really wanted to make sure that we could keep making movies just with the stuff we had on hand. And what we had on hand was our phone. So that was really what we started diving into. And figuring out how can we make movies with just the resources we have available. Yes, and I forgot I was going to give a little description just for anyone who needs it. Just to describe this slide a bit, there's just a group of pictures of Curtis and I in action on various sets. Yeah.
And then on that first picture, you can see we have our little phone set up foregrounded here. And we framed a shot of a hallway. Anyway, shall we?
Let's jump into it.
Okay, that still doesn't work.
You have to click the
I
button.
gotta click the button. So part one, shooting on a phone. So take a look at some of these images. You'll see 6 images on screen. All of them are from different films. And like you just take a look and in your head decide which ones were shot on a phone. As you can see, they're all a little different. Okay.
I think that's enough time.
That's
I think I would have made some decisions on what I think looks like it could have been a phone.
Okay, so it was a trick question. All of those were shot on a phone, and all of these pictures that you see here, all these stills, are also shot on a phone. So that kind of gives you an idea of kind of the variety of different, looks you can get. You have this very nice wide kind of flat image. Here you have a very foregrounded post with a lot of separation and super vibrant colors. So you can get a lot of different images off of the same camera. Yes, the bottom right, that's from our film Box Sniffer 37.
Box Sniffer 37. Yeah.
My uncle sent me a crazy package. It's on our YouTube channel. You should check it out. Okay, so what are the benefits of shooting on phone? One of the biggest benefits is it's very accessible. It is portable, it's popular, and it's powerful. Most of us in this digital age have a smartphone of some kind, which is great because if you have a smartphone, you have a camera that fits in your pocket and you can take wherever you go. So the portability is kind of the biggest thing for us because in addition to, just being very easy to transport and use, a phone also gives you a few opportunities because it's much smaller than a traditional camera. So you can put it in places that you wouldn't expect. They're also very popular. So, because if you're shooting on a phone and you have a few friends who also have the same model of phone, you now have multiple cameras that you can shoot. So you can capture scenes very quickly just from multiple angles, which is great. And we've done that a few times. I will say if you mix phone models, sometimes the image is slightly different. For instance, an iPhone 12 versus an iPhone 13. but they do look similar enough that they will match. Anyway, but to set some expectations, your phone is not going to be a cinema camera. On the left there, you can see an iPhone 13. It has been kind of tricked out with an external lens and a holding cage. And then on the right there, you can see an RE camera with Cook anamorphic lenses and a bunch of other attachments that probably make the whole rig cost more than a car. Uh, so just know going into this, I'm not going to be telling you how to get RE, level footage off of something that fits in your pocket. That's just not a reasonable expectation to have. And once you remove that expectation from your mind, the sky's the limit with your phone. So set your expectations correctly. Smartphones have improved a lot, especially in recent years with their cameras, but they still don't quite match up to professional gear due to their size and due to the fact that they aren't designed for filmmaking. They offer a very limited level of performance and image control. And for this reason, I would say off the bat, don't go emulating other cameras. You can emulate other cameras' looks on the phones, and we've done it. If you saw that one image, that was an image of Thomas, and it was made to look like old film. You can emulate those sorts of looks on a phone and with processing the image in post. But I would say if you're just starting out with iPhone cinematography or smartphone cinematography, don't go chasing the looks of other cameras. You're just going to disappoint yourself because they are not the same. And from a creative standpoint, you might miss out on some of those opportunities that the phone offers, such as its size. Another thing that's really easy to do on a phone is to not emulate, is to kind of make what am I trying to say? You can use a phone for what it's actually normally used for, like vlogging or like recorded slice of life videos, a lot better than you can with a larger camera rig, because that looks almost too nice. But you can't. That being said, you can make a phone look nice. So
Yeah, and I just wanted to say real quick, like, just because, and I think that this is this is sort of what my brother's been saying, but something that we've tried to absorb and sort of adopt as our philosophy is that just because like movies look cinematic because that's sort of what we expect them to look like. We have an image in our head of how movies are supposed to look, but there's nothing saying that there's no rules saying that movies have to look a certain way. And the phone, I think, is just another example of that. It looks like a phone, and just because it looks like a phone doesn't mean that it can't be like a movie. I think a great example of sort of what I'm trying to get at is the movie 28 Days Later, which is a zombie film. Great movie. It's shot on a camcorder, and it looks like it's shot on a camcorder, but it works really well. So anyway, all I'm trying to say is, like once you can break out of sort of the expectations of what is cinematic, it opens you up to a lot more storytelling, and possibilities.
Anyway, so that kind of gets with what I'm talking about. Here we have on the left, we have the iPhone 13 Pro, and on the right is an image captured by a Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro. And they're both images that I tried to frame roughly the same with the same settings of this Arizona iced tea can sitting out on my patio table. So as you can see already, you can tell that there is a significant difference between the iPhone image and the Blackmagic Pocket image, even though they are recording to the same file format with the same color information and the same exposure information. Now, if you look at the iPhone, it's a nice image. If I saw this image on the screen, I'd be like, yeah, that looks good. But when compared right up next to the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro footage, the Blackmagic Pocket has a much richer color space. It has a bit softer background and more separation in depth. It has a shallower depth of field. That's more to do with the lens than the camera itself. But that is a limitation of the iPhone lens. There's a much more contrast between the light and the shadows. If you look in the background here where the sun is hitting this barrier on the iPhone, there's a lot of blown out highlights because it doesn't have that dynamic range to capture the full breadth of from light to shadow. But if we didn't have this here, you'd probably say, yeah, that image looks pretty good.
Mhm.
So when you're shooting on your phone, the first thing you need to do is to get to know your camera. You need to find its strengths and weaknesses. And the best way to do this is just to pick it up, take it somewhere, and start shooting. So a good place to start is lighting. That's always the best place to start, I feel. How does it perform in different lighting environments? In low light, is it very noisy? Is there any way you can decrease that noise? In bright light, is it going to be overexposed? How does it handle high contrast between those two things? If you move from a dark space to a light space, does it adopt? Does it adapt, or does it have trouble? Can it zoom? Most phones zoom, but when you zoom in, are you increasing the digital noise? Is it just a digital zoom, or is there actually a physical transformation happening in the lens? How does that affect your image? Does it have image stabilization? Um, so something that a lot of phones have these days, especially with, the popularity of, TikTok and vlogging, is they have stabilization built into the footage, which is great when you're running around handheld and you're just trying to record something. But if you're trying to get a consistent image that doesn't have any kind of warping or anything, sometimes that can be a problem. And it's just up to you whether and I'll get to more later on how to kind of adjust these things. But if your phone does have image stabilization, that could be a plus. If you don't have a lot of camera support gear and you want to have a stabilized image, or it might be a downside if you don't like some of the warping and sort of digital manipulations that result from that. So it is, and these are just some examples. There's a lot of other characteristics to a phone. I highly recommend doing your own research into the device you have because each device is different. But these are some things to look out for, especially with the lighting and the noise. That's kind of your biggest. Those are the first two big things. So for this workshop, we will be using the iPhone 13 Pro as an example. It's just because it's the phone that I know, but all smartphones are different. So do your research after this if you're looking to get into smartphone cinematography. I will say YouTube and the internet, great resource for figuring out the idiosyncrasies of your phone. Um, if you just look up, blank your model of phone plus the word cinematography, I'm sure you'll get a couple YouTube videos of, people like being tips and tricks. And they might not go into a whole lot of detail, but they will give you a good starting point to start looking deeper in. But honestly, the best way to understand how your phone works is to use it. Just go out and practice with it. And that's the nice thing about having a phone. Fits in your pocket. You can take it wherever you go. So if you're just out one day and you see something that could make a nice shot, try framing it up. See if you can get the shot. You can make a shot that matches what you see in your head. So, um, and I will say practice really does make perfect when it comes to shooting on any camera. So we have some gifts ahead. So when if you see this little red icon here, it means there's gifts ahead. So we got some moving gifts ahead. So that's your warning. Here we go. So every phone has a default camera app. Well, every phone with a camera has a default camera app, and it is possible to use that for a film. Most people, when they say I want to make a movie on a phone, they will likely start in that default camera app, and it is not impossible to make a movie this way. The first film we shot on the iPhone, we shot in the native camera app. It was called Faith. It was for a 72-hour film festival, and we got nominated for a Best Cinematography Award because of it. And as you can see, it's not perfect. The image is not perfect, but we have done, a little bit of work in the color. I will say we didn't really know much about color when we did this, so we were just kind of experimenting, and this is what we got out of
We were
it.
just kind of sliding sliders
Sliding,
around until
yeah.
we thought it looked good. So it's not like we knew what we were doing when we did the color on this film.
But I will say, that is an option if you want to get your phone images to look a bit more stylized. So default camera app does have limitations though, and this is mostly about the iPhone camera app, but you might find this in your own camera app as well. So they are mostly designed for point and shoot video, which means a lot of those processes are going to be automatic. And because they're automatic, they offer you little control over the actual image. And that might be good if you're just, trying to shoot a vlog, but when you're trying to make a movie and you have shot reverse shot happening and you can't control the elements of your shot, your footage is going to end up inconsistent. So focus, exposure, and white balance are usually all automatic. You can lock focus, but it's not like you can change the focus on the fly, like doing a rack focus where you're focused on something in the foreground, then you move to the background or vice versa. Um, and that can be really frustrating, especially when you're trying to frame a shot and your focus keeps changing. Exposure is the same way. You don't have any control over the ISO or the shutter speed, which will influence how your shot is exposed. And then your white balance is also automatic. So if the color is changing from shot to shot, it might not look too bad when you isolate those shots, but when you put them next to each other, that change is going to be noticeable, and it's just going to take your audience out, because they're going to be like, wait a minute, that the lights seemed a bit warmer in the last one. And even if they don't consciously recognize that that's what's happening, their brain will say, hey, wait a minute, something's different here. So yeah, inconsistency. We're just trying to avoid inconsistency. That's the first thing when it comes to an iPhone, is you want to be able to control your image and have it as consistent as possible. And they don't make it easy. Automatic stabilization can also result in unwanted results, like I said, especially if you end up with an external lens of some kind that you put on your phone. Uh, the internal stabilization can often cause some weird warping, especially if you're using an external lens. And then in the case of the iPhone 13, I don't know if this is true of all other phones with multiple lenses, but as you can see, the iPhone 13 has 3 lenses. And when you're framing a shot, sometimes it'll automatically switch to a different lens, which doesn't seem like it would be bad, but it is, because each of these lenses slightly different positions. So if you have something framed perfectly and then it switches the lens, even if the shot composition seems the same, it's going to be a few millimeters off and the angle is going to be different, and it's just going to ruin whatever you were trying to set up. So those are some things to watch out for. So what about Apple Cinematic Mode? If you have an iPhone past the 13, you will know that there is something called Cinematic Mode. And what that is it is meant to make kind of this flashy, quote unquote, cinematic feeling image. And what I've noticed about it is it mostly just offers a faux shallow depth of field that it creates by using image processing to cut out the subject and then putting on a blur, kind of like the Zoom background is doing on us right now. We don't use it. We feel it looks cheap and tacky just because that cutout is not perfect, and it can be unreliable when isolating the subject. It does offer a little more control over exposure than the default settings, but it's still not enough for our purposes. So there is a GIF ahead, and here it is. So if you look here, this is from Apple Cinematic Mode, and you can see that blurred background. I did blow this up, but here's this thermos on my table, and you can see that the background is blurred and the thermos is isolated. But if you look at the side of the thermos, you'll notice that there's a bit of a wiggle in this edge here. Okay. Speak a little more slowly. Yeah, I'll try my best. I do tend to speak fast. So if you look here, there is a wiggle in the edge of this thermos here. And it's not super noticeable, but if you do notice it, that's going to feel a bit weird. It's going to make your footage feel like a bit unnatural. And you don't want strange things in your footage to be distracting from the story you're trying to tell. So that's why I kind of avoid the cinematic mode. If this is not a deal breaker for you, by all means shoot in cinematic mode, because I will say the ability to make a soft background is very nice. Because, and I'll get into this a little later, it's a bit difficult to get a shallow depth of field on a phone. So what do we do because we don't have much control? Well, you get a third-party app that does offer you manual control. These are some examples. I'm not endorsed by any of these companies, I'll tell you that much. These are just ones I've used. So I have 3 examples of manual control apps. We have Filmic Pro, the Blackmagic Cam, and Beast Cam. These all differ in both their functions and in their pricing. And there are more than just these 3 on the market, so I would highly recommend, again, doing your own research and figuring out what works for you. But the long and the short of it is manual control offers you full control of your camera, so you can start to kind of get rid of those inconsistencies and keep things consistent. So I chose these three for a specific reason. So Filmic Pro for a long time was the most popular uh manual control app. A lot of people used it and a lot of people still do. It has a lot of features that mimic a camera. I will get to the pricing on some of the apps. So um Filmic Pro is actually a subscription-based service. It used to not be, but now it is. So I think it's like I want to say it's like $3.99 a week, which I just can't get into because me personally, I don't like having to pay for an app over and over and over again. So, but Filmic Pro is kind of the biggest name when it comes to third-party apps. Blackmagic Cam, if you've used DaVinci Resolve or if you've used the Blackmagic camera, that's the same company. They have a camera app for the phone. Um, which I think might be free. If it's not free, it's maybe a couple dollars. Um, and the nice thing about Blackmagic Cam is it offers pretty much the same basic functions as any other manual camera app, with the added bonus that its user interface mirrors that of a Blackmagic camera. So if you're working on a phone and you use this Blackmagic Cam app, and then you one day get your hands on the Blackmagic camera, that transition will be a lot easier for you because you'll know the layout. And then finally is Beast Cam. I think that one goes for about $3 to $4. Beast Cam is another manual control app made by the Beast Grip company. And the nice thing about Beast Cam is it does offer, manual control for recording video, but this one also offers photography, which the other two apps don't. Um, so if you're more interested in both kind of videography and photography, that might be an app for you because it allows you to have manual control over your image, over your photography as well. Um, and again, each of these are different. I would recommend looking into them. And there are more on the market than just these, but these are the ones I know. So some things to watch out for while shooting on a phone. Not all lenses are made the same. As you'll notice, the iPhone has three lenses, and you might think, great, I have three lenses to choose from. And you do, but these lenses are not made equally. The telephoto lens tends to deliver a less sharp image than the wide lens. And generally, the default wide lens, at least on the iPhone, tends to be the best lens because that's the one that everyone's going to be using. So that's the one that they're going to put all of their effort into making look the best. And then resolution. Many phones now shoot in Ultra HD or 4K. But be careful of phone 4K because something that you can do with 4K footage from a camera is you can take that 4K image and then you can punch in and crop the image to a smaller aspect ratio like 1080, which is HD. You can go from Ultra HD, which is close to 4K, to HD. And that's very useful in post if like your final deliverable is supposed to just be 1080 and you shot it in UHD or 4K and you want to, make some framing adjustments after the fact. But phone UHD or 4K is not always the same. And I'll get into that. I'll have a visual example of that in these next slides. So here's the iPhone wide angle lens versus the telephoto lens. I did my best to frame these equally. Now, there are going to be differences between these two photos just because there's different characteristics in the lens itself. Telephoto lens is going to have a much flatter background and flatter image. But you'll notice here that there's more separation in the wide lens between the foreground and the background. It has a much nicer blur and a nice clean separation. You don't really get that as much with the telephoto lens. Part of that is just because it's a telephoto lens, but part of that will be due to the quality of the camera and the glass. And here I'll blow up each of the images so you can see it better. See here we have this nice separation. The background, it is a bit digital. This is the wide lens. The background is you can see that there is a bit of it does feel very digital. I mean, it's a digital camera, so it is going to feel very digital and clean. But it is this nice blur. You have this nice separation between background and foreground. There's a clearly defined edge for the focus. Now moving on to the telephoto lens. much less defined edge, still a defined edge, but not that same nice softness. It's much more clear with what's in the background. And also, there is a slight color difference. The telephoto seems to have a slightly less color range for whatever reason. Also, if you look in the blur in the background, you can really see, and I wish I could zoom in even more. But if you look right here, especially right here, you can kind of see some digital artifacts, which are a lot more prevalent than was in the wide angle lens. So that's just something to look out for. Again, not a deal breaker. I've used this in my films before, and it's looked fine, but it is a bit of a noisier image. So that's just something to be careful about if you're really trying to look into that sort of thing. So now we move on to that cropping that I said. This is a iPhone UHD ProRes shot that I've cropped to 1080. So I've cut out this 1080 section of that same shot of the Arizona T-Can before. And as you can see, it's still a fine image, but you can definitely start to see some more of the digital you can see some of the imperfections. There's a lot more digital noise, especially surrounding the text in this white air in these white parts. You can see a lot of this, hard digital pixelated edge. You can start to see a lot more. You can start to see some banding in the color, and I'll get even closer to this in a few slides. So you can start to see some like this hard separation between this lighter area and the shadowy area on this can versus the Blackmagic Pro. Again, same settings as the phone, exact same settings, but a different camera. There's still a bit of blown out highlights, but there is those edges are a bit less hard. Those digital edges are a bit less harsh. There is still some bands of light of color here just because that's the way it was lit. But that gradient is a bit softer here versus the other one. And if we get really close to it, here you can really see it, There's there is a significant difference in the noise between the iPhone and the Blackmagic Pro. So again, it is not a deal breaker to zoom in on your iPhone footage. I've done it before and it's been fine. But just know it is going to look a bit less high quality if you go from a UHD image to a 1080 image on a phone versus if you did that on a traditional higher power camera. So, more things to watch out for. There's a lot to watch out for. That's essentially all this talk is going to be. Just things to look out for and things to deal with. Variable frame rate. A lot of phones have a variable frame rate. Most third-party apps do boast that they can have a constant frame rate. I found this to be true most of the time, but sometimes, for instance, if I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, sometimes when I go into my editor, it says 24.5, and that's not great. Not a deal breaker, but it's not great, and it's a bit of a headache. So, do what you can to keep your frame rate consistent. That's mostly on the shoulders of your phone, not you. There's only so much you can do to stop, certain software glitches from having, frame rate issues. But one of the things you can do is don't overburden your device. When you overwork your device and it has to work harder to capture those images, that's when glitches can occur. So, for instance, this phone theoretically, I think, can shoot in 1080 at 120 frames per second. I've punched those settings into this phone and I've never been able to get it to shoot like that or it might be 260. Point is, when trying to shoot slow motion on this phone at a higher resolution, every single time I've tried it, immediately it has dropped frames and I've not been able to get any good footage out of it. And I mean, this phone is still pretty powerful, but there's certain things it can't do very well. So overworking your device can cause glitches. So just again, and that's just something you'll find with if you just experiment and practice, push your phone to the limits, see what it can and can't do, and then that'll give you a better idea of what you can and can't do with your phone. And then the other thing to think about is file codec. iPhone 13 Pro and above shoots in okay. shoots in ProRes, and I think maybe they're experimenting with some new RAW formats as well. Anyway,
And can you just explain to the audience very quickly, in case they don't know, what you mean by file codec and like ProRes?
right. So file codec, so what it essentially is this tells your phone how much essentially what information to record when recording video. So if you record in something like an 8-bit file codec, you're going to have less color information, but your file sizes are going to be smaller. ProRes is a high quality recording codec, and what that means is you're going to have higher quality images at the cost of storage. So, for instance, I think recording at 4K ProRes on this thing is like over a gigabyte per minute of footage, and if you're shooting all day, that's going to add up very quickly. Just keep an eye if you are, if you do want to shoot in those higher quality video files, you just have to make sure you have the space, you have enough storage space, because actually on the gym is now closed. We shot that in 4K well, it's not 4K, it's UHD, but it says 4K. ProRes, on this phone, and this has a terabyte worth of storage in it. And so, we had plenty of space to work with, but by the end of shooting, it was getting filled up. And as it got closer and closer to hitting its storage cap, we started seeing more glitches. We lost footage a couple times because the camera would just stop recording because it recognized that there isn't going to be enough space to keep doing this for long. So, find out how much storage your phone has. You can go into your settings and find that out. And then just look into how much storage you have versus how much you think you're going to record. Honestly, I now rarely record in ProRes just because I feel like the benefit does not outweigh the storage costs, and I shoot in 10-bit 10-bit H.264, just because it's much less it's a lot less storage and on my phone. So, and that's good for these sort of when I'm shooting something quick. If I'm shooting like something that I want really high quality, I will switch over to ProRes. But if I'm making just, a short film over the weekend that's going to go on YouTube, 10-bit will get me as far as I need to go. So, exposure. So, like I said,
You want to explain what exposure is?
yes. So exposure is essentially the amount of light in your footage, how bright your image is going to be, how much light you're allowing into the camera. So in traditional cameras, exposure is controlled with 3 elements: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. ISO is a digital function. It essentially raises or lowers the brightness and sensitivity of your camera footage. Shutter speed is a holdover from the film days. I mean, it still exists, but uh, it's less of a No, wait, no, I'm wrong. Sorry. Shutter speed is shutter speed slash angle refers to how many times your sensor is going to be exposed to the outside per frame as the shutter spins in front of the sensor, or what would have been film stock back in the days when they shot film. So essentially what you want your shutter speed to be and that will, hang on. Shutter speed will affect the amount of motion blur in your image. So typically the standard is you want a 180-degree shutter angle. So what that results in is 2 exposures of the frame, 2 exposures per frame. And if you're doing shutter speed, that tends to be 1 over twice your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, you want your shutter speed to be 1 over 48 or 1 over 50. And then f-stop is the aperture. So it's a device that opens and closes. You have one in your eye, actually. A similar system in your eye that restricts the amount of light or allows more light in. And that will affect your depth of field on a traditional camera. The problem with at least the iPhone is they only let you adjust shutter speed and ISO even with the camera app, with the third-party apps. I will say just to be clear. The native camera app, at least on the iPhone, does not let you adjust these things individually. It just says exposure, and it lets you drag down a thing, and you don't know what you're changing, if you're changing ISO or if you're changing shutter speed. But the iPhone only lets you adjust shutter speed and ISO. And this can cause some problems because that means you're stuck with the amount of the depth of field that you have. You won't be able to change that as much as you want to. And second, it means you are now restricted to only having two options for changing your exposure. So if you're out in a very bright environment and you've dropped your ISO all the way down and you're still getting overexposed footage, that means you're going to have to go change your shutter speed. And as you change your shutter speed to let less light in, that's going to result in less motion blur. So then any footage you shoot out in that bright environment, it's going to feel choppy. It's going to feel there's not going to be much blur. And maybe that's what you want, especially if you're going for that stylized look. But maybe you don't want that. Maybe you don't like the way that looks. And if it's too bright, you really don't have any other options. So that is one of the drawbacks, and I think one of the biggest drawbacks of the phone. The lack of aperture control also means that your depth of field is fixed. So in order to achieve that sort of shallow, nice blurred out background and shallow depth of field, the only way to do that is to position your subject physically closer to your camera, which, it works, it looks good, but sometimes you want your subject to be a bit further away, but you just have to sacrifice that depth of field. And again, knowing the limits of your camera will inform you of what environments you can shoot in with what you have. So, and then color. Regarding color, white balance tends to be automatic in default apps, but you can, in third-party apps, you can set your white balance. And white balance controls the temperature of your image. And you want this to be consistent always. And you want to make sure you've calibrated and locked it down before you start shooting. Because what happens is, even if you're shooting in the same environment, if you have your auto white balance on, and you switch your angle, something in that image might be different, and then it's gonna adjust the white balance accordingly. And then what happens is when you go into your editor and you're looking between those shots, maybe one's warmer than the other, and you don't want that. So yeah, just making sure your white balance is locked down is honestly, your colorist will thank you if you have one, or you will thank you if you are your colorist. Newer smartphones also offer 10-bit and HDR color spaces. Just something to be aware of. These are great to work with, but just know which one you're working with when you shoot. It'll help you or your colorist down the line. Just knowing, okay, I'm shooting with, in a 10-bit color space versus an HDR color space. And that, and mixing HDR footage with SDR footage. HDR, by the way, stands for, I think, high dynamic range. Shooting in HDR footage and then putting in SDR footage, there is a difference in both the exposure and in the color space. So they look a bit wonky next to each other sometimes. They can be mixed, but it takes more work to make that happen. So just know what you're shooting in and keep it consistent, I would say. Also, I know certain apps, Filmic offers a log profile, and I think Apple is now coming out with their own log format. And what log is, it refers to a logarithmic curve in the color profile, in the picture profile. So what happens is, essentially, without getting too much into it, it results in a very flat, desaturated image when it comes to color, which is great for color grading. But if you are going to shoot in log, that means you will have to grade your footage. And there are benefits to shooting in log. Gives you a lot more room to work with if you are trying to kind of grade your film to have a certain look. But only do it if you're prepared to either color your footage yourself or you have a colorist on hand. And then lastly, another thing to look out for in the image is tone mapping. Now they may have fixed this on the newer models of phones. I don't know, but what tone mapping is it is essentially something that controls the color and not color, the brightness of your image. So essentially what tone mapping is meant to do is when you're taking a photograph, it it looks at the image and tries to even out some of the exposure so you can see everything that you need to see. The problem is when you take that same concept, and it's great for a photo, but when you take that same concept to a moving image where, light might be changing in the shot, it can cause some interesting problems. For instance, if you go from shooting out to a very bright environment and then move to a dark environment, because of tone mapping, when you move to that dark environment, the image is going to brighten up. And there's, unfortunately, at least on the iPhone 13, there's nothing you can do to stop that. The only option you have is determining global versus local. To the best of my knowledge, global refers to making those changes based on all the information in the image, whereas local is pixel is based on information of nearby pixels. So global is going to have sort of a more general change, but a more consistent change, whereas local is going to have a more chaotic change, but it might be a bit subtler. Again, they may have fixed that on the newer models of phones. I don't know, but you should check to make sure your model either whether it does tone mapping or not, and if it does, what you can do to either stop it from doing that or what you can do to control that. But that's just something to look out for. And you mostly see that again, moving from like a very bright part of the shot to a very dark part. So that's why, we like avoid moving from an image that's very bright to it, like a pan from a very bright spot to a very dark spot. We try to avoid that because when we make that movement, that footage is going to kind of brighten up and it's going to look like we had on auto exposure, even though we didn't. Yeah, even with manual exposure controls, you can't stop it, it's a bit annoying, but once you know to look for it, you can kind of avoid it. So let's get to the fun part. External lenses. We've all seen, or maybe we've all seen, that you can get different lenses that kind of attach onto the front of your phone to change the image. The nice thing about external lenses is they're cheaper than proper cinema lenses, and they allow you to give a different look to your film. So, for instance, a telephoto lens will flatten the background and give you a shallower depth of field. An anamorphic lens could stretch the image for a wider aspect ratio. And we have a few lenses that we like to use on our films. The telephoto is actually super useful because remember how I said that the wide angle on the iPhone is a bit higher quality than the telephoto lens? Well, with an external telephoto lens, I can put that on the wide angle lens, and suddenly my wide angle lens is a telephoto lens. So I'm getting the same characteristics as this telephoto lens with the higher quality image of the wide lens. So that's kind of nice. And there's plenty of different brands and lenses to choose from, all at different prices, and they vary in quality. We like to use B-Script. We are not sponsored by B-Script. I wish we were because they're really cool. But we like B-Script because they have pretty high quality lenses. They're a bit more on the expensive side, but they have threading on the front of the lenses that are standardized. I think 58 millimeters might be what they usually are, and that allows you to adapt filters for traditional camera lenses onto those iPhone lenses, which is super useful for the filter section, which I'm going to get into next. But first, let's see some examples of some what external lenses can give you. So here on the left, we have your default iPhone 24 millimeter lens. Again, here's that Arizona can in that same spot. And as you can see, perfectly fine image, great image. And then here we have cropped the anamorphic lens. I cropped it so it would be the same aspect ratio as this one, and they'd kind of match up. You can see there's a bit of distortion on the sides. It's a bit of a wider lens, and it's a bit of a wider lens, and there is going to be distortion on the side because that's kind of the characteristic of anamorphic lenses. As you get towards the center, things tend to look, normal, and as you get to the edges, they tend to distort a little bit. And you might be able to see that a little bit in this straight line here or on the table, on the curve of the table. And then if you look in the background, you have sort of this it's a bit softer focus, and you have some a little bit of ovular oval shaped bokeh, which is the dapples of light coming through the dabbles of light in the out of focus area. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of, so they're similar images, but they are different in feel. And again, uh, it's not necessary to have a external lens to shoot a film to shoot stuff on your phone, but it is an option if you want to give your footage a bit more of a specific characteristic. And then here's that telephoto lens. Again, here's that Arizona can on that table. Slightly different angle, but still on the table. You can see the trees in the background. And again, I tried to frame these as similarly as I could. On the left here, you have the iPhone 24 millimeter lens. And on here, you have the iPhone 24 millimeter lens with a 1.7 telephoto lens strapped onto the top of it. And as you can see in the telephoto picture, that background is a lot more compressed. But unlike the default telephoto lens, we aren't losing any picture quality here. And we still have that nice separation between the foreground and the background. So again, these aren't essential must-haves for you, but if you have the money and you want to, maybe experiment with some new looks, maybe invest in a lens or two. Now, what is going to be necessary is a filter, and I'll explain why. So filters are great for adjusting colors, exposure, and image.
And I guess we should clarify what we mean by filters. It's not Instagram filters, but actual physical, I guess, for lack of a better word, glass filters that you screw onto the front of the lens.
The original filters.
The original filters.
So yeah, glass filters that you screw onto the front of your lens. Filters are great for adjusting colors, exposure, and image. You can get if you look online, there are plenty of different filter brands to choose from. But what I want to talk about is neutral density filters. Now, what neutral density filters are, or ND filters, are filters that restrict the amount of light that come into the lens. And those, I think, are the most useful peripheral you can buy for a phone. Forget, external lenses, forget, a gimbal. Get an ND filter. And here's why. ND filters, because they restrict the amount of light that comes into the phone. Now, when you go outside and, it's too bright, you put an ND filter on that thing and you can keep your motion blur consistent. You don't have to sacrifice your shutter speed for proper exposure. Mm-hmm. So anyway, if you're going to get anything for your phone, I highly recommend that. And there are plenty of different ND filters to choose from. They do tend to be a bit more expensive. But I got one for, I think, $35 for my first foray into iPhone filmmaking. And $35, that's cheap for film gear. So, and it wasn't perfect. There was a bit of it had a bit of effect on the color, but it worked, and I was able to run around outside and you get proper exposure without having to sacrifice motion blur. But yeah, there's plenty of options to choose from to that effect. And then there's the fun filters like diopters, haze filters, prismatic filters, and those are things that will kind of change the quality of your image. I will say, I forgot to mention, if you do end up getting an anamorphic lens for your phone, I highly recommend getting one that you can put filters on, because you're gonna want a diopter set. Because
so I guess let me just jump in real quick.
I got
to say something.
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
No, just about the ND filter.
Yeah, go.
A good way of thinking about the ND filter is basically it's sunglasses for your phone. That's
Mm-hmm.
what it is.
Yeah, sunglasses for the camera.
Yeah.
Anyway, diopters, close-up diopters, they're magnifying glasses essentially that you put on the phone, on front of the lens. And what that allows you to do, for whatever reason, anamorphic lenses in general, they have a hard time focusing on things up close. So getting a set of close-up diopters or macro diopters will let you get that close focus and get a clean, focus on something you're really close to. I have a set of diopters. I got it for $8. They aren't the highest quality diopters, but $8 for a diopter set, not bad. I got them for $8 off Amazon. I want to say it was Actually, I'm not going to say what brand it is because I don't want to say the wrong brand and get people going on a wild goose chase. Just know I went on Amazon and looked up 58 millimeter diopters, and boom, there they were. So if you get an anamorphic lens, I highly recommend getting one that you can put diopters and ND filters on. Actually, that's true of any lens, but mostly for the ND filters. ND filters are so useful. Anyway, I forgot to warn you about gifts. I'm sorry. Here are a bunch of gifts of different lensing and filtering options. So here in this first image, okay. Here in this first image, this is a good example of the ND filter in action. You'll notice it's a bright sunny day, but look at that nice motion blur on these moving on the papers falling. You know, we're looking right up at this sky and nothing's getting blown out. It's nicely exposed. You have that motion blur. Here we have Thomas. In this film, his character had a bit of a freak out scene, and we want a really chaotic look. Chaotic and kind of blurry look to this part of the movie. So we slapped a few close-up diopters onto an anamorphic lens. And here we have, you know, you can see it's very blurry, it's very distorted. And that's exactly what we were looking for. This shot here of this I think that's vinegar being poured into a hot saucepan. This kind of goes to the advantage gets into the advantages of using a cell phone, because you can get certain shots that you wouldn't be able to get with a larger camera. Here, I just put down my camera on the counter, and then we shot this shot. And I wouldn't really be able to get. I don't think I'd be able to, you know, position a larger camera on such a small counter space there. This picture of this clown licking this knife, this was for a commercial we shot, and this actually doesn't have any lenses or filters on it at all. And I included this to show that you don't need filters to make a stylistic image. A lot can be accomplished with lighting. We have some nice red and purple lighting on this in this setup, and you know, it looks very stylized. Looks a bit like a music video because that's what we were going for. But you know, it looks very stylized, even though it's just the basic camera. That's just the basic lens with nothing added onto it. Down here we have this little, I guess it's like a lawn Roomba thing charging down the lawn. Good example of both the ND filter at work, because you can see there's a lot of bright sunlight, and it's a good example of the telephoto lens, because you know, we're a bit further back from it, but we have that nice shallow depth of field here. Yeah, and then this last one, there's Thomas sitting at a table, looking very depressed, with a nice slow push in on him. And this is what the anamorphic lens looks like. But we include this shot because the thing about the phone that is also great is it allows you to improvise a lot more. We did not have a dolly for this shot. What we did have was a small tripod, some tape, and a skateboard. So we just mounted the phone onto this small little tripod, put the tripod on a skateboard, taped it down so it was nice and stable. We stuck that on top of this table that he's sitting at, and we just slowly pushed it towards him. And it looks great. And that's something you wouldn't be able to do with a larger camera, because larger cameras require a lot more, for lack of a better term, infrastructure to support. Also, speaking of camera support, I think this is the last slide of my section of the presentation. So I'll just get off this. I'm not, well, actually, never mind. Speaking of camera support, you may have seen advertised, or you may have seen people use phone gimbals, little stabilizing handheld stabilizers where you strap your phone into them. And you know, we have one of those. It's a lot of fun to use. We actually used it on this shot of this clown. But I will say the thing about phone stabilizers is they are a bit of a gimmick. Phone gimbals are, you know, they're designed so they can just clamp onto a phone and just kind of stabilize them. But the problem with that is their motors aren't very powerful. They're used to having this size of a, you know, 1/4 inch this size of a payload on them. So if you put an external lens or anything on, it's going to be too heavy and you won't be able to use it. So I highly recommend, if you do have, for whatever reason, have the money to buy a good stabilizer, a good gimbal, I would recommend getting one that's fitted for a DSLR or a larger camera. They are much more expensive, but if you have the money to spend on that, I would recommend getting that over a cheaper phone gimbal, just because it will give you more options regarding lensing. Then again, if you really do want that sort of like gimbal look, a phone gimbal's not terrible. It just means you're going to be super limited on what you can. You're going to essentially be limited to just this. You won't be able to put any filters on it or any external peripherals. So,
Chris, there was a question in the chat. I just wanted to ask this out loud to you because you might have them there. It was just, do we have a favorite budget tripod?
oh, good question.
I think we have a with Viltrox.
Yeah, we have
our biggest, bulkiest,
our bulkiest tripod. It is still. How much does a Viltrox go for?
I'm trying to remember how much we paid for it. I think it was somewhere. It was over $100.
Yeah,
I think it was somewhere in between $100 and $200.
Yeah.
So that's not exactly. I mean, that's budget in film world.
Yeah, that's budget in film world, not budget for people like us who
don't have that money. But
yeah.
Well, actually, no, this actually is a good opportunity for me to talk about something just in terms of equipment. The nice thing about the phone is it's small and it's light. So you don't need a proper film tripod to use it. I know we have some really cheap, just like, I don't know, like photography tripods. I can't remember how much they were, and I have no idea what brand they are. But those work just as well for the phone. They're a little bit harder to work with because they're not built for video, but it's not that it's not too difficult to adopt those. And also, just this allows me to talk just generally about film equipment. We buy a lot of our film equipment used. We were lucky enough that the school we went to, Johns Hopkins, they had they had their equipment cage, not the film center's equipment cage, but they had another equipment cage just for use of the student body. Every year they'd have a yard sale where they would sell old equipment that was either just old or they was maybe a little broken for really cheap prices. Also pawn shops and just buying film equipment used. Like you won't be able to get like really high quality stuff, but like the lights that we have, they're really they're cheap and they don't always work. Well, no, they do work. But it's a lot cheaper. So what I'm trying to get at is like you don't need to be buying new all the time. For film equipment, buying used is a really good option. Because I think for all of the films you're seeing here, except for the one with the clown, because that one was using a film light that was borrowed from a friend. Oh, hey, somebody in the chat worked at the DMC at JHU.
Nice. Hey, welcome in.
Welcome in.
We bought we bought a lot of stuff from the DMC.
Love the DMC.
Love that place. But yeah, if go around to local, thrift stores and pawn shops. You can also find people selling their used stuff online. The thing about this business is it's hard to make money, so a lot of people are selling their stuff because they need money. So
actually, another really good question from the chat is, do we need a special adapter to use a non-phone tripod?
Yes, you do.
But I highly recommend getting an adapter. We have two. One of them was the image you saw earlier with the which was that cage that had the phone inside it with the lens screwed on. That has a screw on the bottom that can screw into pretty much any tripod. And you can get clamps that will hold a phone kind of like this. And you'll just screw those onto tripods. And I highly recommend getting those because it means you can put your phone on any tripod you get, any sort of thing that has a tripod mount.
Anything with, I think it's an 1/8 screw. Don't quote me on that though. I'd have to double check. 1/8 screw. It's either 1/8 or 1/4. I think it's 1/8. It might be 1/4. I think it's 1/4. Whatever. It's a standard camera screw. But you can find, we have a super cheap plastic phone clamp that we used for a few years, and all it is, it's just like
A spring.
a spring and two like little little hands that just kind of clamp down. And that works great if you have a tripod. You know, so yeah, I highly recommend getting two, if you're gonna get any two things of peripheral equipment specifically for your phone, outside like a tripod, ND filter and just something that helps you, just a clamp or some other apparatus that will allow you to put a phone on a tripod.
Mhm.
And with that, you can go and you can make so many movies, just with that setup. But yeah, so that kind of concludes my, oh yeah, anamorphic lens. Yes. So what an anamorphic lens is, actually, could you go grab it?
Yeah.
Real quick?
Where is it?
It's in the bag. It's in the film bag. One of the film bag. Okay, so your traditional lens, as you can see, is circular. It has a circular lens, and it's, it's round. What an anamorphic lens is instead of being a circle, it's parabolic. So what that means is, now this is not the best example because this is straight and flat, but if you look, camera lenses are usually rounded in the front as a circle. This is a rounded rectangle. And what that does is it is when the light goes through the camera lens, it is refracted and compressed into a squished image. Squished image. And then what happens with that squished image is you stretch it back out. And when you stretch it out, essentially what it's doing is it's squishing the image, a widescreen image onto your standard sensor size, which is a bit hard to explain verbally without visual examples. But Thomas is getting the, you can find it. It's in the backpack. Thank you. I should have had these on hand.
Yeah, it would probably have made your demonstration of it easier.
It would have made it so much easier. So this is an anamorphic lens. So as you can, hopefully you can see, can you see this?
Yeah, you can see that, I
Kind
think.
of.
Kind of.
Yeah, hang on. Impromptu lighting session. Here. Does that help?
The zoom blur really doesn't.
Okay, I'll put it next to my face. Does this
that work?
Okay, great. So you see that how it's rectangular?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that squishes the image down onto the sensor, and then you stretch it back out, and it's a wider screen for aspect ratio. So it changes your aspect ratio. And I will say, if you do end up getting an anamorphic lens, oh, this is broken. I got to get a new pouch for that. Most manual camera apps tend to have an option in their hardware settings to say anamorphic like 1.33, and it'll stretch your image for you, which is super helpful. You can also stretch it in post, but that's a bit harder. Anyway,
I also brought this one. I also brought the film cage this also doesn't like this, but this is the cage that we use. You strap the, oh my God.
Here, I'll hold it.
Whatever. Yeah, you strap the phone in back there, and
it's got a little spring.
It
locks down. And I bought this one. It's a bit more expensive, but it is adjustable, so I can adjust it to. Now this is just a tech demo for B-Script. You're welcome, B-Script. You can adjust it to fit different. It's adjustable for different phone sizes, which I think is super useful. But you can buy phone specific like cases. I think Moment, which is another
for your body to make it, to make it not
do
the
that.
thing.
Yeah. Ta-da. I know there are other. This is a B-Script cage. I know that companies like Moment is another company that makes lenses. They tend to have like a specific case for the phone that adapts their lenses. And there's plenty of other brands that might have a different pricing, because I know B-Script and Moments products. They're high quality, but they're a bit pricey. But anyway, there's plenty of stuff to research and look around and shop for. So yeah, any other questions? If not, I will switch spots with my brother and he will start talking about low budget filmmaking.
I know we went over a ton of information there.
Yeah.
But really, like, what that portion of the talk boils down to, and is just to get to know your camera. Go out and experiment with it, thank you. Experiment with it, just find out what it can and can't do, and then figure out, the ways that you can maximize your creativity in those limitations. That's all low budget filmmaking is knowing what your limitations are and maximizing the creativity that you can find within those walls. Anyway, and we'll have another section for questions at the end if anyone comes up with any. But I'm going to talk now about low budget filmmaking. This is not going to be as in-depth and technical as the last part of the presentation. And I'm just going to put this out there now. There is no secret to making a successful low budget film. I wish there was. I wish there was one thing that I could tell you in this presentation that would, you'd know how to make a movie. But a lot of this just comes from practice and doing it and being creative and just anyway, this section is just some of the lessons that we've learned. And I think it's going to focus, I think, a little bit on just things that we've sort of found out just through making movies. So yeah, I'm just going to jump right into it. So low budget filmmaking. My focus on this is sort of focusing on where those drivers of expense are and cost are, and sort of the way you should be thinking.
I'm realizing we never said why the presentation is titled what it is.
I know, I just realized that. We had a whole intro for it.
We did.
But I guess I can go for that now. We were supposed to do this at the front, but the reason we titled this presentation "Just Make a Movie on Your Phone" is that I feel like this is a common experience. There's a director giving a talk and at a film festival and an interview, and inevitably they get asked the question, what should filmmakers do to like become great directors? What are you supposed to do to get your start?
Yeah, what are aspiring filmmakers supposed to do? To get
to start. And every single one of them has the same answer. It's like, well, you've got a phone. Just go out there and make a movie on your phone. Go out there right now and make a movie on your phone. And that's where their advice ends. And they don't give you anything more than that except to go out there and make a movie on your phone. And they don't tell you anything more. So we're trying to shed a little more light on what you should do.
Yeah.
When you're making a movie on your phone.
Wow, we just reached the end of the original scheduled time.
Oh my God.
Oh man.
I'm sorry, everybody. We just love talking about this stuff. It's very easy for us to go on. So if you need to leave at any time, feel free to. This will all be on YouTube. And Curtis, can you just put our website in the chat in case anyone has questions?
If you have questions,
you can find a way to contact us at our website.
And then if you have any questions or follow-ups, you can shoot us an email there, and we'll get back to you about it.
Yeah, because we're happy to answer things. Anyway, I will now begin my part. This part is much shorter than the first part, though. So starting with development in making a film, it all starts with your script, and not all scripts are created equal. The first thing you want to do when you're looking at the film you want to make is, go through your script like a producer and identify all of the drivers of expense. Like, what do you think is going to cost the most money? And they're not all stories are equal. Like, it's probably much easier to make a film that is set in an apartment than it is to make a film set on a spaceship, right? Because I feel like it's a lot easier. For me personally, I know how to get access to an apartment. I'm not sure how to get access to a spaceship. And so what you really want to do is you want to read and see, okay, how many actors am I going to need? If you've got a lot of actors in your story, that means that you need to find a lot of actors. And if you're going to have a lot of people on set, you're going to need to pay them. And if you're not paying them, you're going to need to feed. Actually, if you're paying them or if you're not paying them, you're probably going to need to feed them. And every mouth to feed is another cost. Where are you going to be shooting it? What kind of props are you going to need? how long is it going to take for you to film this thing? Because each day is like, the more days you add to your schedule, the more expensive your story's going to become. Can you shoot it in a day? Can you shoot it in a weekend? It's a lot easier to get a film made if you just need to shoot it over the weekend. Because at least for me, like, I'll work for on a low budget film if it's shooting for a day. That's fine. I can take a day to do that. Um, anyway, but that being said, your budget doesn't determine your story. It just determines how you tell it. And, like, just because, like, you may not have a large budget, but don't let that discourage you from writing a story on a spaceship. Now, I keep saying spaceship because I'm going to get an example of exactly that. And that's this film here, which is called 513. It's made by Ted Hogeman. It's Laughing with the Storm on YouTube. And this is his film. It's 513. It's about a man who's like his spaceship is malfunctioning, and he needs to, like, sort of navigate an asteroid field. I think it's been a while since I've watched it, but as you can see here, this was made as part of a 48-hour film competition. And what Ted did is he created this cockpit, as you can see, and he used this comic book filter to sort of, number one, give it a stylized look and get these really nice and vibrant colors. But number two, just sort of obscure the production of this. Because this, if you look at it long enough, maybe you can see, how he's doing it. But when you watch it on film and in motion, it's a pretty convincing effect. You think that this is a guy in a cockpit, when this is really just, it looks like some lights, some C-stands, probably a chair. This spaceship down here, it's also got the filter on it. I believe this is just a sponge with some stuff sticking out of it. It's just a model that he built. And Curtis, if you could link the link to the short film.
I'll link to the short film
on his YouTube. Honestly, watch all of his stuff because it's a really great example. He does a lot of speed competitions. It's a really great example of how to be creative with, not a lot of time or crew or anything. And he has a lot of, like, how he has a lot of videos talking about, how he accomplished the effects that he did. Anyway, so that's why I'm using this as an example, because just because you don't have a lot doesn't mean that you can't make stories like this. You're just going to have to be creative in how you bring that story to life. Development. So save time to save money, and that's very true. In the film business, time is money is very, very true. So one of the things you want to be doing is thinking about just how can I film my story in the most efficient way possible? Like, what's going to take the most time? How, like, if I'm filming a scene, if I have multiple scenes in the same location, is it possible for me to film all of those scenes at once? So much of filmmaking is just optimizing these things and problem solving and trying to anticipate these things before production starts, solving problems before they happen. If you're like me, I am in my normal life, thinking about every possible thing that can go wrong is not good. But when you're a filmmaker, it is good because you're anticipating problems. You have to be thinking, okay, what are all the possible pitfalls, obstacles, hiccups that might occur to me during production? Because especially on a low budget film, you don't have time or money to, like, if suddenly you can't shoot, that's kind of a problem. Because you don't have $1 million to spend on reshoots. So you have to be thinking about, what are all the things that can happen and how many of those can I solve before cameras even start rolling? So I don't even have to worry about that. And I can spend the time that I am on set focusing on, making as good a picture as possible. Now, one of the time-saving measures that we did on our films is pre-visualization and storyboarding. Now, I can't draw, but I don't need to be able to draw because we shoot on a phone. This is from our film, The Gym Is Now Closed. On the left-hand side, we have images of our producer / co-writer, Jack. And on the right, we have stills from the actual film. We had access to our set beforehand. And we knew that we were going to have access to our set beforehand, and we knew we were going to be filming it on the phone. So what we did is that before we went to shoot, we spent 2 nights at this gym, and we basically shot. We didn't act like do all the dialogue and stuff, but we mimed the film. So we found all of our camera angles, and we shot it on the exact same phone that we were going to be shooting the real film on. Now, obviously, things changed in between there. These angles are slightly different. The color and lighting is totally different. But what this did was it allowed us to have those conversations of, we didn't just have a shot list that we say, okay, we need to shoot a medium close. Well, where do we put the camera now to shoot this medium close? We didn't have to do as much of that on the day when we were on set. We didn't have to waste time figuring out where to put the camera because we already knew where to put it. Yeah, and you don't even need to have access to the space to do this. This is from a different film, Dinner for Six, which was made as part of a we weren't really the people behind this film. We just shot it. We were the cinematographers. But we were filming in this restaurant. It was for I guess it was a speed competition. We had a week to do this. Easter Seals Disability. Yeah. Film competition. But we had this restaurant for I think 2 days to film in, and we could only shoot before they opened.
And there was a similar situation with the gym. We can only shoot when the gym
was closed
at night.
At night. So we needed to make, and we didn't want to keep people late. So with those time constraints, we needed to make sure that we had a plan in place. We needed to know what we were doing before we got there, so we didn't have to waste time figuring that out. And we couldn't get into the restaurant beforehand, but we didn't need to. We just set it up here. As you can see, we didn't have a third person, so we just used a pillow to be the shoulder of our third person. And they changed in between. See on the right hand side, I'm playing this character, the character sitting at the table. Curtis is playing the waiter. But it works. And we had a starting point. We knew sort of the general look we were going to try to achieve. And this allowed us to get in there and just be able to set up the camera quickly and get all the angles that we needed. There are some GIFs ahead. These are going to be GIFs from our latest film, which we did not shoot on an iPhone, but we still ended up using an iPhone for our pre-visualization. In this sequence of the film, it's sort of, I guess it's an action sequence. We have a closing garage door. And the thing about the closing garage door is that there's a sensor. So when you go under that sensor, because of safety, the garage will stop closing and go up. So we wanted to make sure that we would be able to convincingly sell the illusion of a character ducking under the door and the door continuing to close, without, because we didn't want to turn off the sensor because we didn't want anyone to accidentally get crushed by a garage door. And so this was a way for us to test to see how that would look. And it gave our cinematographer an idea of what the visual style of the film was going to be. Yes. Yes.
Did you want to say anything about well, we can't go back, but
I
do you want to say anything about the
shot? Which one?
Yeah,
the closing shot?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So if you were watching that clip, you'll see that in the very end of it, there's the garage door is closing and the character reaches under to grab in the film a paintball gun when we were doing the pre-visualization a tennis racket. And again, because there's that sensor there, we can't just reach under the door. And also we just didn't want to crush our actors' hands. So what we needed to test was to see if we could do it in reverse. What we actually did was we opened the garage up and we had the actor reach in and place the gun down and then withdraw their hand really quickly. And then when you played in reverse, it looks like they grabbed it and things slammed shut, but that's not what happened. But we need to make sure it works first. So we didn't spend a long time on set figuring that out, or find out that that doesn't work on set and then we're screwed because now we have no way of getting the shot we want. Location. Location is another really important thing with filmmaking. And I think especially in the script writing phase, it might not be something that you're thinking about. I know certainly for me, when I'm writing, I'm just writing whatever I want to write. And maybe not giving too much mind to how we're actually going to do that. But it's an important thing to consider. I'm going to bring up restaurants. A lot of scripts that I read from screenwriters who want to make their films is they've got a scene set in a restaurant. And I think it's a very ubiquitous thing to see restaurants and films. They're a great place to, have a date, have a meeting, have something happen. It makes sense why you put a restaurant in your script. But when it comes to actually making the film, do you have access to a restaurant? And if you have access to a restaurant, do you have access to enough extras to fill the restaurant? When are you going to film in the restaurant? You'd have to do it when they're closed because it'd be very difficult to do it when they're open. So those are the sort of things you have to be thinking about when low budget filmmaking. And if you run into something like that, you have to think, okay, if you've got a meeting in a restaurant, is there some other place that they could meet? A park or something. A park is a lot easier to film in than a restaurant. Um, Private versus public. If you're filming in a public location, you're going to need to get permits. You're going to have to deal with people passing by. At this bottom image is a still behind the scenes photo of one of our first films, Nurikabe, which we filmed on the C&O Canal, which is a public trail. We filmed it at this lock house, and we filmed it on the trail in front of the lock house. We got permits from the National Park Service, and we got permission from the trust that maintains this lock house to film inside and around it. But we weren't able to shut down the trail. So we just had people walking through while we were filming, and we needed to, that caused a few delays because we had to wait for them to pass by before we could start again. So filming in public is something to look out for. It's something to consider when you're filming. If you're filming a horror movie, you're going to want to have signs up telling people that you're filming a horror movie because someone could be walking by, and even if you're on private property, someone could be walking by, they'll hear someone screaming, and they might be concerned and call the police. And that's happened to some people that we know. They've had police called on them while they're shooting a horror film simply because people don't know that you're shooting a movie. Private property is a really good thing to get just because you have permission to be there, and you have a lot more control. It's private, so there's much less of a chance for you getting interrupted while filming. If you do opt to go for private property, though, make sure that you establish a good relationship with the property owner. Make sure that you're clear about what things you're going to be doing on their property, and make sure that they're involved in the filming. Like, make sure they know what's going on. Because the worst thing that could happen is that someone gives you permission to film at their place, and you start doing things that they don't approve of or consent to. And I think that it can happen that people, like, someone is asked, "Hey, can I film my film at your house or whatever?" And to the layperson, they may not know all of the things that are involved in filmmaking. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds great. But there's lights, there's a ton of people moving around, people are clumsy, things can get broken. And now you should respect the space if you are being allowed to film there. But things happen. And so you just want to make sure that you're on good terms with the property owner, because because they can kick you out if they want to, if you're, sort of taking advantage of of the permission that they gave for you to be there. So that's just something, and that is a cost saving measure because you don't want to get kicked off the property and have to find a new place. Also, if you have a location that you have access to, what stories can you tell in that location? For the gym is now closed, we knew the owners of the gym, and we knew that we would be allowed to film there. So we started knowing that we had a gym, and we wrote a story to fit into that environment. And that's a really great way to start, is like, and I think that's a good way just to approach filmmaking in general is, what do I have? What do I have right now that I can use? And what kind of stories can I tell with those things? What can I tell with the resources I have with me right now? And that's a great way to start being creative. People are a super important part of making movies. You can make movies on your own. It's really hard to do. And for me personally, I love just the camaraderie that comes with working on movies with other people. The people part of making movies is just the best. And you don't need to live in Hollywood or Atlanta or Toronto to find creative filmmakers. We make films we moved to California. Actually, we moved to we moved to where they make movies. But for all of our lives, we lived in rural Maryland, and we were still able to find a ton of great creative independent filmmakers, and form relationships with them. Actors, there's so many actors out there. There are great actors that are just waiting to be discovered, and we've used websites like Backstage, Facebook, and just networking to find our cast. And our crew really usually comes from networking, working on other people's projects, meeting the people who are working on those projects. And if they're good at their jobs and you get along and you vibe together, it's really easy to just hit them up afterwards and say, hey, really enjoyed working on this thing with you. We are doing this project. Would you be interested in being a part of it? And paying, and this is low budget filmmaking, so paying people is going to be hard. You might not, you can't, union rates, like a cinematographer might go for $900 a day, and I don't know if you have enough money to pay $900 a day.
We don't.
We don't. So you have to think about, what can my film offer to people beyond just financial compensation? For maybe the cinematographer that you want to get, maybe most of the stuff they shoot is commercials, but they really want to shoot narrative things. So if you give them an opportunity to do that, that's an incentive to join your crew beyond just getting paid. Actors always need material for their reels. So if you have a really good part for an actor where they can show off their acting abilities, that's going to be very attractive. And also, like, just simply having a short schedule. If it's a day, it's a lot easier for someone to come out and help out for a day than it is to take an entire week off. So, just think about, what can you offer to people just beyond, financial compensation? Make it worth their while to be there, and they'll show up. People don't care if you don't care. I think one of the really important things to do is just show that you are very serious about, the project you're making. You might not have a lot of money, but if you show that you are committed and passionate about it, that's important. You're not just treating this as, something we're doing on a weekend. You're treating this seriously. And if you demonstrate that you're treating it seriously, other people will treat it just as seriously. And just the more that you do for your crew, the more they'll do for you in return. So, if you show that you care about them, you appreciate their time, you don't, you're not taking advantage of them being there for you, and just making the on-set experience as pleasant as possible for them, like, that's just more incentive to do the best job that they can. And that's really, a lot of the stuff I'm going to be saying this sounds like common sense, because it kind of is, but they are things that you want to be conscious of and thinking about. Yeah. Production. So just some other production. This ties into food is a huge part of making movies, especially when you're low budget filmmaking. If you have people working for you, either at low pay, full pay, volunteer, doesn't matter. If you're working long days, you should feed them. Not just because it's a nice thing to do, but because it's practical. Having food in your stomach gives you more energy. It means everyone's just happier. The moods are better when people aren't hungry and hangry. So food is something you definitely need to invest in. It's a major driver of expense. It's probably the thing you'll spend some of the most money on, but it's a cost that you have to pay. And there are ways around it, like, you don't have to cater the meals. If you have someone who can make a bunch of food for you, it's a lot cheaper to go to the grocery store and just make a big, I don't know, pot of pasta.
Salad bars are an excellent idea.
Salad bars are an excellent idea. Like, that's cheaper than maybe catering. If you're gonna buy food, make sure that the food, has some variance to it. Nobody wants to eat pizza for 2 days straight. Pizza's good once.
Typically on the last day.
And typically on the last day, yeah. But not only will this just make your crew happier, it shows that you care. It shows that you care enough about this production to put some thought into the food that you're serving. And that's really like so I say here, mind the details. And that's how you need to be when you're on a production. You need to be paying attention to every detail and putting effort into every detail. Because, it adds up. putting effort and care into the little details adds up to something great. And in a similar way, if you skimp on certain things, if you just half-ass certain things, that also adds up and will detract from your film. I have here, make your props feel used. This is just the example I use, just in sort of the way that you should be thinking and approaching all aspects of your production. A lot of independent films, if you watch them, pay attention to the props, because sometimes the props, the production just went to the store and bought it, unwrapped it, and now we're using it. And in the moment, that's fine. But if you look at it, it makes the props feel like they're store-bought, they're brand new, they haven't been used, they're not really a part of the world, you know? If you have like fake money that you're using, make sure you crumple the dollar bills, handle them, make them feel like they've changed hands a lot of times, unless they're supposed to be new dollar bills, because it'll give it a more realistic feel to your world. And that's just the sort of level of care you want to try to approach everything in your production. It takes a lot of effort. It's not easy. There's a lot of things to keep track of, but the more care you put into that, the better your end project will be. I have written here, the best camera you can buy is good sound. And this is 100% true. People are like, when you think of film, you think of image, you think of camera, but people are actually, I think, a lot more forgiving of image quality. Like I said, 28 Days Later, it looks like it's shot on a camcorder. It's a very beloved film. But what I think people are slightly less forgiving of is bad sound. So if you're going to invest in anything, make sure that you're getting good sound on production, Make sure that you're turning off the AC if the AC is on. You're taking away hums. And getting a good crew to do that, getting a good sound mixer to do that, is really useful. Get people who are good at their jobs if you can. I mean, obviously you want people who are good at their jobs, but if you have people with you that you can trust will do the work, you don't have to micromanage them, and you shouldn't micromanage them, because the people who you have working, you've hired people to work for you for a reason. It's to do their job. This is their specialty and expertise. So, give room for your crew to do their job and to be creative and to discover things.
Ooh, how to get good sound with a smartphone.
That's a really good question.
There are a few things I would highly recommend. Do not record sound off of your camera. Make those two separate I guess workflows. That's probably not the best way to put it. But there are some tips and tricks for getting good sound with a smartphone. One thing you can actually do is using a second phone.
Now, if you have a second phone, but if you have two people on your crew and you both have phones, one of you uses your phone like as the camera, and the other person can like use the notes app, or just put your phone, like if you're far away from your actors, just hide the phone in the set somewhere.
Yeah.
And record from there.
Use like the voice memos app.
Yeah.
And because the thing about getting audio directly off the camera is now your audio is the audio that hi. Now the sound that you're getting is dependent on your camera placement, and you don't want that. You want to be able to get a mic as close to your actors as possible so you can capture that dialogue. And you can get, there's cheap audio equipment. It's not super high quality, but if you know its limitations and you know how to use it, we have a shotgun mic that we bought for less than $100 when we were in high school.
And we still
use it. Yeah. Because it's better than nothing, and we know how to make it, and we know its limitations. We know, okay, it's not a super high quality mic. It's not great at isolating stuff. So we don't use it as a super directional shotgun mic. We use it more as a general capture mic. Mm-hmm. So yeah. What do you hook up the mic up to for filming? That is a great question. For us, we are lucky enough that we have a Zoom recorder, mm-hmm. which is a handheld sound recorder, which is really useful for mixing stuff. You can actually buy, I don't know if I have one on hand right now, but if you look online, you might be able to find I know I have a
XLR to
it's an XLR to
headphone jack
adapter, and it has a little volume slider on it, so I can plug a mic into that and plug that directly into my phone, and then I can adjust the levels from there. If you are recording sound, I recommend finding just it could be an app, it could be an external device. You want to be able to control the level of sound you're recording.
Mhm. Or
Hey,
you just,
portable recorders, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah,
The Zoom recorder, I will say, investing in the Zoom recorder is
very,
very, very nice.
very nice. Yeah.
If you can afford it. They do cost, but they do make it a lot easier to get sound. But
But yeah,
but and I was actually gonna get I will get actually more into sound in post, but I guess I can talk about it now and I'll just skip it later. One of the things that we do is we build out a lot of the sound in post production. Um, because we like when we're there the day of, we're capturing the dialogue, but we know that we can, if it's sound effects, if it's background noise, like we can add that in post. And I'll have some resources at the end of this for getting sound. But so what we try to focus on when we're shooting, we really focus on getting the things that we can't get later, which is usually performance, dialogue, any sort of like sound effects, like keys hitting the ground or something, like we can get those later. But we really want to focus in on, getting what we can't get later.
Yeah. Also, what it helps for sound, uh, find people who work in sound.
Mhm.
We don't have a great sound setup, so we've always brought in, yeah, hi. We always we always try to bring in people who know more about sound than we do.
Mhm.
Um,
And
so
and if you can meet, and if you meet people who are willing to help you out, if you meet a sound mixer who's willing to come and work on your project, he'll probably have equipment.
yeah,
Um, you know, but yeah, if you're just doing it on your own, yeah, just voice memo app or getting a cheap microphone.
just get you the name of the game is you just want to isolate that dialogue
Mhm.
as good as you possibly
If,
can.
if you're doing a dialogue
If
thing,
you're doing
we're always doing dialogue things, so
Yeah.
that's
If you're not doing a dialogue thing,
yeah. If you're
building out a soundtrack in post is great. A
Mhm.
soundscape in post is a great way to really elevate your film. And we'll
Yeah,
get into that.
we will. Yeah, I'll talk about that in post production just a little bit. Um, but yeah, but if your sound is bad, it's very noticeable, and it's going to really impact your film much more than bad camera work or just a less high quality camera.
Oh, one more thing about recording sound in production. It always, if you are, shooting with a small crew, it's always good to have like one person whose sole job is the sound recording
Mhm.
because, you can direct and operate the camera at the same time. I don't like doing it because I feel like it splits my attention too much, but I highly recommend having one person whose sole job is to focus on making sure you're getting the sound you need
Mhm.
because you can, with certain editing, with if you get enough coverage, you can kind of cut around some mistakes with the camera. You cannot fix bad sound as well.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, it's much harder to fix bad sound. And the last thing I'm going to say, and this is another one of those common sense things, is do not shortcut safety. The whole thing of low budget filmmaking is finding ways to save money and saying, okay, what's the cheapest thing I can do? What can I take out? What do I not need? Never ever do that with safety, ever. Because whatever you saved, it's not worth it if someone gets hurt and then you have to pay medical bills. That's never happened to us. I will say that's never happened to us, but and we've never had an experience on set where something's really gone wrong, thankfully. But I've been on a set where they were starting a fire, and I looked around and I was like, do we have any actual way of putting this fire out if it gets out of control? And they were like, oh wait, no, we don't. I was like, all right, let's go get a bucket of water to make sure that we can put that out. And it's kind of become a motto of ours, and this is how we approach just movies in general. It's sort of a metaphor for it, is don't start a fire unless you have a way to put it out. That's just sort of our approach to filmmaking. um and yeah, and the other thing about safe, so like on our most recent film, Operation Wet Paint, we were using prop guns, but we were going to be firing real paintball guns. And so we took some time out of the day to just do a safety briefing, which we modeled after actual firearm safety briefings. Just because we knew we were going to have kids handling prop weapons, and we wanted to make sure that they were safe and that the parents knew that they were going to be safe. So, we followed all the procedures, no fingers on triggers, unless you're going to shoot it. No, we kept the live actual firing paintball guns separated from our prop guns. Only we were allowed to handle the ammunition, like things like that. And some people might think it's overkill to do that for you know, using paintball guns, but for us, we want to show that we cared about this and that we were taking this as seriously as we were. And if you show, and this comes back to showing your crew that you care about them. If you're shortcutting safety, you show to your crew you do not care about their well-being, and they are not going to want to work for you if you demonstrate that. So, this is common sense, but it really is something important to do, especially in the world of low budget. And then in post-production. So post-production, learn how to edit. I think that honestly, knowing how to edit has made me a better filmmaker. And editing is one of those things that I feel like you can sort of learn the basics of, but you really have to do it a lot to sort of, get the groove of it. And there's a lot of softwares out there to edit in. Premiere is sort of the standard that everyone knows. That's
not
Adobe.
not the industry
not
standard.
industry standard, but like that's the one that
That's the one you'll see all the YouTube tutorials for.
exactly. That's the one that costs a lot of money. That's Adobe. Oh, I didn't write DaVinci Resolve. I wrote DaVinci. It's called DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is made by the Blackmagic, same company, and they have a free version of that editing software. And it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of Premiere. There's a paid version of DaVinci too, but the free version has all the basic tools you need to do editing. So, you don't need to be spending however the amount of money that Adobe charges per month for Premiere. You can do it on DaVinci. You can even use iMovie. iMovie's it's harder for me to work with, but it is an editing software. It's limited in what it can do, but if you know what it can do, you can use that as your editing software. So learning how to edit is important. And if you hire an editor, they'll hopefully have software that they'll use. But if you're doing it on your own, learn your editing software. It's just like everything else. Learn all the aspects of film production. Know what goes into it, because you'll know what you need to do. You'll know what you need to do to make it happen.
CapCut. CapCut's another option. I haven't had much experience with it. I know a lot of people really. Hi, I'm back. CapCut. I know a lot of people who use that for things like TikTok and other sort of web-based entertainment. If an editing software, all you need to be able to do is it needs to be able to do essentially 4 things. You need to be able to put your clips on a timeline and move them around. You got to be able to sync up audio with those clips if you're recording separate audio. And then you need to be able to, I guess, cut them. And then you need to be able to, it needs to be able to stitch all that together into one clean, working, final deliverable. Mm-hmm. And that is the basics of what you need to begin with. There's plenty of other stuff that can be done that can really that can be used for your film, and editing is a lot more complicated than that. But at its very basics, all you need to be able to do is to cut up your footage, sync your audio, put it in the right order, and then export it into one thing. Mm-hmm. So as long as your editor does that, you can make something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like we need to learn how to use DaVinci. We don't use DaVinci.
We do not use DaVinci. I keep trying to learn it, and once my Premiere subscription runs out, I'm gonna
switch. But yeah, so editing. One thing, and this is less about saving money, but well, it is and it isn't. But one of the things that I think I noticed with a lot of amateur films, first-time filmmakers is sort of, and this is something I've tried to adopt, and it's hard to adopt, especially if you're cutting your own film, but you cut your film as long as it needs to be, not as long as you want it to be.
Clipchamp. I've never heard of Clipchamp. I haven't used it, but apparently it's free, so.
Heck, we started our editing. We started when we were kids. We were editing on Windows Movie Maker.
We were editing on Windows Movie Maker.
Anyway, what was I talking about? All right, I remember. And so be objective when you're editing, you know? Pay attention to things like pacing. Like you may have a shot that you really love, but if it's interrupting the flow of your film, you might need to get rid of it, and you have to be ready to do that. I've seen a lot of films that are dragged down slightly because they hold a shot too long, or they needed to get something in that I guess maybe they took a long time to get, or they just really like the idea of it, but it's not actually working, and they keep it in there. And yeah, it's just something that I notice occasionally, and I'm guilty of it too, because I'll send something to someone and they'll come back and say, you need to cut this part out. I'm like, I really don't want to cut that part out, but in the end, they're right. Um, and why is that a cost saving measure? Well, length of the film is actually important if you're trying to get it into festivals. It's a lot easier for a festival to program a shorter film than a longer film. If you're going to make a film that's 20 minutes long, by all means, go do it. But if you're trying to submit that to festivals, it's going to be a lot harder to get it in because unless that film is really good, they'd much rather film two 10-minute good films than one 20-minute good film. And
Oh, thanks, Sol. Thanks for coming.
yeah, we're almost done.
We're almost done, but if you have to go, we completely understand
Yeah.
that. We are really running over here,
Yeah.
but
All right. So yeah, so just pacing, keep your films as short as you can get them if you're trying to get them into festivals, because they'll make it a lot easier to program. You'll increase your odds of getting it. Sound and music, that was something we were talking about before. Building out the sound in post really elevates your film, and we do that a lot. Pretty much all of our movies, we're putting in so much sound effects, background noise, just anywhere where we can build a sound space, we're building it, and we're doing it in post. We're not doing it day of. Resources, free sound is where we're going all the time, and that's a website full of free sound effects that people have recorded and submitted. You have to check what the copyright situation with most of them are, but I think a lot of them are just free use. So highly recommend free sound. SoundSnap, I believe, is another subscription service. You'll get more high quality sound effects from there.
but it is
paid.
It is paid.
But you can absolutely make a movie with free sound.
Skinamarink,
which was a horror movie that came out last year, all of its sound came from free sound. And that played in theaters. So,
that wasn't last year. Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was last year. It was last January.
Wow.
But building out your sound space, and you can go out, you can take your phone and you can go out and like record sound effects on your own and then cut that into your film.
Plenty of times I've just taken out the voice memos and I've just pointed my phone at something, got my phone up real close to something and use that as a sound effect, or plug the mic into my phone and then use it as a mobile recorder.
Yeah. But sound will really help your film. It'll help make it feel more cinematic the more that you build that out and sort of craft it. And then music. If you're lucky enough to get a composer and you can afford a composer, having a composer is great because you'll have a custom score for your film. It'll move with the image. It'll react to how the image is on screen, and it won't be, maybe a royalty-free song that everyone's kind of heard before. But if you don't have that money, there's plenty of free music resources. I've listed two here. Incompetech, which is the Kevin MacLeod royalty-free songs. You've definitely heard those before if you've ever watched any YouTube video ever. But he's got a ton of different, you know, songs on there, that tracks that you can use and you can cut parts out of and use in your films, and we use that all the time when we're doing speed competitions because we don't have time to compose music. Free Music Archive, that's another great resource. The copyright, you have to check like what you can use the music on there for, but there is music on there that you can get. We've used that before in our films as well. Yeah, so you can absolutely, you don't need a composer, is basically what I'm saying. You can absolutely get away with having music in your film if you use these royalty-free, copyright-free options. And then lastly, just have a distribution plan. Know what you're doing with your film once it's done. Are you going to put it on YouTube? Is it going to go to festivals? Festivals is great. Every crew member really likes to hear the idea of festivals. They like the idea of their work getting shown on the big screen. If you're going to do festivals, though, set your expectations and your aims accordingly. you're not going to get into Sundance. I'm just going to come out and say that it's so hard to get into Sundance. So you're much better spending your money somewhere else. Unless you've got like a really, really, really great film. I'm not saying that you can't get into Sundance. I'm saying it's really hard. So like for our last film, Operation Wet Paint, we made it in Maryland. So we shot for a lot of local Maryland festivals, regional festivals. We went for a lot of festivals that had like a family friendly section to their programming. And basically having a strategy for where you think your film will be most at home will increase your odds of getting into a festival. And yeah, like when people ask, what is this going to festivals? You kind of want the answer to be yes, because that's like people want to know that the work they're doing is going to get shown to other people. So yeah, that's all that. All right, we've gone very over, and I apologize.
Yes, we have.
But
now is the time if you have any questions
questions.
about any of that stuff we just said.
If you have to go, I'm gonna just switch it. We will still answer questions, but I'm gonna switch it to the contact info page. This is our website, our Instagram, our email. You can contact us if you have other questions. If you just want to follow along, you can also see a lot of our films are on our website. So if you want to see our movies, see the stuff we've actually made on a phone, you can see it there. And
a lot of the stuff on that website is shot on a phone, so you can
so you can see what we've done. We'll put our money where our mouth is, and you can see,
yeah,
us actually putting into practice the stuff we've been talking about. But yeah, if there are any questions.
Yeah, now is the time. Let's see. Oh, we got for opportunities and resources in Maryland. Oh, from fellow Maryland. Oh, nice.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Let me think. What are some
MSAC.
MSAC? Yeah, Maryland State Arts Council has a grant program for art projects in Maryland. They have two grants in particular. I think the grant for artists and the creativity grant. The grant for artists, you just need to show that you're an artist living and working in Maryland and that you're working on things. And that's a lottery system. I think it's $6,000.
Thank you for coming, Ty.
I can't remember how much the grant is. But that's based on a lottery system. So basically, if you qualify for the grant, you'll get entered into a lottery and maybe you'll get it. The other one is I believe, Creative Arts Grant, which is project based. So you apply to that, you describe the project. This is one of the ways that we funded Operation Wet Paint, is we were lucky enough to receive that grant. But you submit an application to that, and a committee will, judge their applications and decide who gets grant money from that.
Also, a more general thing is, check in with your local if your city or your state has an arts council, or if there are you look around for local resources, because it's a lot easier to get a grant from a local resource than it would be to say a national resource.
Like a national competition.
Yeah, or like
Also, go on Facebook is Facebook, but there's a lot of regional filmmaker groups on Facebook.
Yeah.
That's where we've found some jobs. That's where we've found other people to work on things. So yeah, go to Facebook, become part of like local filmmaking groups. Go to local film festivals. That's a great way to meet people. That's how we met some of the people who we have working on our film. We met at a film festival. We watched each other's films. We really liked them, and we're like, we should work together. So those are other ways to do it. I'm trying to think of other, like, if any Maryland specific things. Can't think of any other Maryland specific things. If you do, I think if you go to Johns Hopkins, figure out when the DMC does their yard sale, and you can buy equipment from them.
Actually, I think even if you don't go to Johns Hopkins.
No, that's fine. I mean, physically go there.
Yeah,
and go to their yard sale.
Look up the DM if you're in the Baltimore area. Look up when the DMC has their yard sale, and go see what they're getting
if they're selling any film equipment.
It is at the end of the spring semester. Yes.
Yes.
So, and that's probably not just restricted to our college.
Yeah, probably not.
Look up local colleges. See if they have a media center, and see if they're
see if they're getting rid of equipment. I don't know if they will, but maybe.
Maybe.
Who's to say? Yes.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Hey, this is Beck speaking. I see that Cynthia has her hand raised in the chat.
Oh, excellent.
Go right ahead.
Hey there. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. So I'm mostly trained as a choreographer, so most of my filmmaking experience has been in screen dance. And so when it's most like DIY budget form, I'm usually filming myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my questions is, so that usually means like technically it's the easiest to use the front-facing camera, which we know is the worst lens. So I was wondering, is there an easy way to be able to use the better lens on an iPhone, but like have me be able to see myself
Good
while I'm
question.
filming?
I will say there's not a lot that you can do
Okay.
that's cheap.
Okay.
I will say there are, a lot of phones nowadays have an option to run a video feed out of the phone into an external monitor, but unfortunately, the apparatus required to do that costs money.
Right.
But I mean, you can, if you look into finding some way to adapt your phone's feed to, say, an HDMI, and then if you have like a small monitor with you
Or TV.
or a TV or something, you can plug
Yeah.
that in, you
Or
can
even
look
like
at
a
it.
laptop or something.
Yeah, or laptop. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. The thing that came to my mind first was like, well, I mean, if you really wanted to be super DIY about it, you got a mirror.
Yeah,
You
that's
put
what
a
I was
mirror up
You
and
just
like
put a mirror up.
Oh,
Honestly,
like a physical mirror?
yeah, just
physical mirror.
physical mirror. I mean,
Right.
it'll be reversed, but you
Right.
know.
But I mean, I'm trying to think because we filmed a few things of us where we're
Yeah.
both in it and
Mhm.
we've not had anyone on the camera. I think with those it's just planning and like, looking at the like basically setting up the frame and like figuring out, where the frame lines are in the space and figuring out
Yeah.
the space where
Yeah, I
it's
think it's
definitely
because
hard.
yeah, a lot of what I might be doing is just like choreography of the hands and that like enters and exits the frame in really specific ways. And so like that requires me to like really see what's happening in real time. So anyway, I can look into the like sending my feed out somewhere if it's possible, but just thought I'd ask.
I know also I can't speak to many of the camera apps, but I know some apps have experimented with like a remote control function. I know
Mm.
Filmic had that a few years ago. I don't know if that's still around.
Yeah, but they had it basically so that if you had two phones
or two devices,
you
Yeah.
could see the feed from the phone on the other device.
Yeah.
Okay, that might be
You
interesting.
might also be able to just cast your depending on what kind of phone you have. If you have like a TV or a laptop, there might be options for casting the phone to
Oh, in real time. Okay.
but I don't know. Yeah, that's I've never really had to run an external feed. But I do know that there are options for running an external feed. So
Okay.
but if
Cool.
not, I try a mirror.
See
It
if
might
it
work.
works. See if it works.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have a question from Sabrina.
Hi. I was just gonna say, like, for that question about like trying to get like an external feed, I don't know if it's like quite possible, but I know I have like an Android phone and like I've had like a Chrome, like pretty much like an Android phone can like connect to anything that is like a Google TV or like Chromecast. Like so like you might be able to like, I don't know, somehow like, yeah, like do like a screen share. I know you can do screen shares with like Google like a Chromecast. So like that might be an option depending on like what stuff you have. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You're
That's like
learning things.
very but
Love it.
like I've definitely like done it for like an installation where I had to have something on like a tablet on like a projector, and like the projector was connected to like a Google, like a Chromecast, and then I just like screen shared. So yeah.
Cool. Anyone else?
Anyone else got questions? We have answers.
Maybe. If we don't have answers, we can make something up and improvise. Okay. Well, It seems like there's no other questions. Again, if you think of anything, you can contact us here. We're always happy to chat with people. We love teaching stuff and just,
We love
helping as many people make movies as possible. Like that's our ultimate goal. Is just to have as many people making cool stuff as possible.
So
So
thank you all for coming. I know we went way
Really
over.
over.
We appreciate those of you who
Stuck around.
Stuck around. Those who had to leave, I hope they'll catch the rest of it on YouTube.
Mhm.
Again, thank you so much. And shameless plug, go
watch our film. Go watch
watch
Operation Wet Paint. It's a part of the RestFest. And also go watch all the other cool films that are a part of this festival.
Yes.
Um,
Check out the festival. There's a lot of cool stuff here. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.